you mentioned earlier about like the role that how early that in your career that diet nutrition was kind of like instantiated into the philosophy through the interning with Charles. I'm curious because obviously we came together through Spoken, and your expertise is really at the heart of the product line. When you what has changed in your philosophy around like performance nutrition and supplementation from back then? Because Charles, people who followed his career, some of the gaffes, some of the things we were proven wrong, the supplementation protocols. Then I remember
I could tell stories. Like, look,
can you legally?
no, I could tell some stories legally, and then the other ones are you got to wait for my book. But like Andre Benoit, like there's only a few people that go way, way, way back that really like spend enough time that knows. Like, I mean, okay, to answer your question, less is more, and I think that's one thing. I used to I used to really focus on like the before and the after and wanting all of my guys to be underwear models and basing the success of the off season on if they're shredded or not. And the reality of it is it does matter. But the answer lies in the middle, which with most things that people ask me, it's like it's not like somebody's all this or somebody's this. The answer usually lies in the middle. And in this case, diet absolutely matters. But I like to say they'll look like underwear models as a residual or as a side effect of eating and training, but that's not the goal. If you look across the board in any sport, again, you can, of course, what about this guy? But generally speaking, in 90 percentile across the board, the most jacked, lean dude is not usually the best player. And that, take it for what it is. I'm not saying that means eat shit, but I just probably 10 years ago or so, I've still done that 14 site body fat that matches up to a DEXA scan. I have written over like 90,000 programs since 2000, and I have a database that keeps it since 2006. And so you can add more than that. And I've been doing that body fats. I was teaching them with Charles. I can now do that body fat 14 sites with my eyes closed. I can grab people and do it. And I also, like you can ask my interns, I can look at somebody, I can do the body fat and tell you what you are before the number comes within a percent. But I've been doing it for 30 years. So we still do the body fat, but I certainly don't prescribe 50 supplements based on your Australian or insulin or cortisol or stress management or adrenals, etc. I less is more. And again, I also understand that nutrition is none of us really, everyone's so freaking positive, and people should be a lot less positive when it comes to nutrition because there's a lot going on with the gut and things that we just aren't positive about. So, first of all, how many of these people are doing blood work on people before you're prescribing things? And like I could tell you funny stories of like I train a lot of Russians that don't speak English and like they're allergic to fish oil or fish or something, and you like giving them shit that you could, effectively kill them something. So it's really important to understand that less is more. You understand that these are athletes, not bodybuilders, and calories in. For example, I would say that most young athletes are actually malnourished. They come to us and they're going to school. They're not eating much. None of them eat breakfast. They don't eat much after. Then they come train. And then typically they get on the ice. I'm talking about during the season. They get on the ice at like 8 p.m., 9 p.m. And they're mostly malnourished. They're dehydrated and malnourished. Where ironically enough, the pros typically eat really, really well. And then during the season, they don't really eat well, which is odd. And I have a line where I say that I get everybody at the end of the summer, they're highly toxic, skinny, fat, and injured and weak. And that's what you get with an athlete at the end of their seasons. So at the peak of their play, so to speak, playoffs, championships, Stanley Cups, whatever, these guys are injured, they're toxic, they're skinny, fat, they're weak, they're going on fumes. So to understand how to not only address a proper training program, but understanding how to, you know, finesse the diet in instead of hitting them on the head like I used to do. Like just being like, oh my God, I want you eating no carbs. The classic Charles is like, you could lick a prune every 3 weeks kind of shit. I mean, it's not necessary. And you still can get guys, I have a guy right now, he's put on 14 pounds of body weight and his body fat stayed the same while he's put on 11 pounds of muscle. And he's done that by, obviously, you're not going to do that eating zero carbs. So, and the supplementation is very, very simple. But that's the major thing that I've changed through Charles is I still emphasize diet. I still believe in it. It's still something huge, but I just don't want to focus on sort of these before and afters because that doesn't tell the tale of can you run faster, jump higher, increase more mobility, change direction, decelerate, do all of these things that you have to do as an athlete.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned like the blood work and Poliquin. Anyone who's ever even opened a biosig, piece of reading material on biosignature, it almost read like the way people do blood work now of like if this then that, right? Like a lot of people look at nutrition and supplementation like empty gas tanks. Like this is low, so we're going to give you that. And it's just like, when you start to understand a little bit of the complexities around sort of that tensegrity model of training and nutrition and organ systems and hormones and
Yeah.
what was sort of like your breakthrough? Because, when going through the formulas, Sleep Builder is obviously the one that kind of jumps out of the page, but we're talking about, sleep, but then you're talking about blood glucose and regulation, and we're talking about, digestive tract issues. Where did you start to kind of break away and form your own kind of your ethos around nutrition and supplementation? What was it for you that you're like, you know what, this 50,000 pills a day, everyone's got so much vitamin D, the sun's shining out of their asshole. Like, what are we, I know we need to simplify and this is where we need to go. What was that breakthrough point for you?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard for people to fathom pre-Instagram, right? So like a lot of these decisions that we made, and I'm like, look, we produced Olympic athletes before a force plate, before timing gates, before Instagram. Like you could still do things. You just had to think, and you had to talk to people, and you had to read books. Um, and you had to go to seminars. Like nobody wants to go to a seminar anymore because everybody's got it figured out. Shortly after I broke away from Charles's methods of training, I switched my style of training. Like Charles was a revolutionary because what he started doing. So, right, like I talk about bias all the time. And if you look, Louis Simmons, obviously there's bias. He was a power lifter. He believed athletes should train like power lifters. Obviously, they shouldn't. I mean, I could go on and on about the tightest hips and internal range I've ever seen in my life for people who box squat, things like that. Um, Charles was a bodybuilder. There was nothing more important to Charles than his arms and getting there. So it's like what he did was when early on he started going to holistic conferences when no one really, this was pre Huberman and all these guru holistic docs now. Charles would go to these conferences and he would take tidbits of all of this holistic doc stuff and put it into his. So what he did, for better or worse, you have a bodybuilding a bodybuilding workout. So you're going to put on muscle. And if you're coming from the world of you just rode a bike forever, now you're going to lift weights and you're going to eat a low carb diet. And he was really the first one to introduce like high dose fish oil. And obviously we've tapered that back. But when it comes to like glutamine, yeah, you give credit to Bill Phillips and EAS early on. They had the hydrogen or HP, phosphagen HP was the creatine upload that they came out with. And, they came out with that, and then they came out with glutamine. And Charles was in that kind of group along with Bill Phillips and then started really pushing that thing. So when I started really making a name training a lot of athletes, meaning like that's all I did in my career is wake up in the morning, train athletes, write programs. I changed the way I train people. And that's when I broke away from, sort of this extreme low carb dieting, um, fat shaming, if you will, and eliminating a lot of the unnecessary, 50 grams of glutamine post workout, uh, high dose fish oil. Charles was also the very first one to start using adaptogens like ashwagandha. He would use for sleep early on. Lion's mane, I remember using that. Rhodelia rosea, cordyceps. Like this is 20 plus years ago. We were using all this stuff, and he was just kind of, the mad scientist, just throwing shit at these guys and hoping it sticks and getting results. But the results, like, what are you quantifying if you're a strength coach? Are you quantifying they were faster on the ice or they got leaner and I did a good job? And I think most of the things he quantified success was they benched more, they were leaner, and their Scott curl went up. And not that that's wrong, I just didn't resonate with me anymore in beliefs of training an athlete. And so, you had Paul Chek doing wood chops and Swiss ball, and you had Charles doing Scott curls, and you had Louis doing box squats and dynamic effort. So, I somewhere in the middle of that pyramid took a little of all of it and, continued to make what I believe worked for athletes.